When we talk about personal growth, people often imagine it starting with some massive shift, a dramatic breakthrough, a life-changing moment, a bold leap into the unknown. But the truth is, real transformation rarely begins with anything that dramatic. It begins with small, almost invisible steps. The kind of steps that feel so simple, so subtle, you might even question whether they matter at all. Yet, these are the steps that start the snowball rolling. Think about the last time you tried to improve your life in any meaningful way. Maybe it was waking up a little earlier, reading just a few pages of a book, taking 5 minutes to breathe before diving into the chaos of your day. In the moment, those actions feel tiny. They don't come with fireworks, applause, or an overnight identity shift. What they do come with is potential for momentum, potential for identity change, potential for long-term transformation. It's in those first actions that you begin telling yourself a new story. You prove, even in a small way, that you're capable of showing up. And when you show up today, it becomes just a little easier to show up tomorrow. That's where the magic begins. The snowball grows. What starts as a small act of intention becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a habit becomes part of who you are. And when your identity shifts, your potential expands in ways you couldn't have predicted from the outside. The world often tells us to wait for motivation before taking action, but momentum works in the opposite direction. Action creates motivation. You don't sit around waiting to feel ready, you build readiness by moving. Even the smallest nudge forward changes your physiology, your focus, your energy. It's like that little snowball at the top of the hill. If it just sits there, nothing happens. But give it one push, just one, and gravity takes over. Suddenly, what felt heavy becomes easier. What felt overwhelming becomes manageable. What felt impossible begins to feel within reach. And this is where people underestimate themselves. They think the first step needs to be huge to make a difference. But the difference doesn't come from the size of the step, it comes from the decision to take it. Once you make that decision, you start to experience the quiet power of accumulated effort. A few minutes of progress stack up. Those stacks turn into confidence. Confidence turns into momentum, and momentum becomes the unstoppable force that carries you through setbacks, distractions, and moments when you don't feel like pushing anymore. So when we talk about the snowball effect of personal growth, it's really a reminder that your life can transform not by doing everything at once, but by doing one meaningful thing today, something small enough to start, yet significant enough to matter. Because once it begins rolling and you keep nudging it forward, that tiny snowball becomes something powerful enough to reshape not just your results, but your entire sense of what's possible. And it all starts with that first small push. If there's one truth about growth that people overlook more than anything else, it's this: consistency beats intensity every single time. Everybody gets excited about big goals. Everybody loves the idea of reinvention. But the people who actually transform their lives aren't the ones who sprint for a week. They're the ones who show up day after day, even when nobody's watching, even when no one is cheering, even when the excitement wears off, and the results are still invisible. That's where the compound effect kicks in. Think about how compound interest works in finance. You don't become wealthy because of one big deposit. You become wealthy because small deposits grow on top of each other over time. Personal growth works exactly the same way. Every day you practice a skill, strengthen a habit, or honor a commitment, you're making a deposit in the bank of your future. At first, it looks like nothing is happening. It feels slow, painfully slow. You start working out, and the scale barely moves. You read every night, and you still feel like you don't know enough. You meditate for 2 weeks, and your mind still feels messy. But something is happening. Not on the surface yet, but deep inside. Your discipline is getting stronger. Your belief in yourself is getting sturdier. Your identity is shifting from someone who wants to change into someone who does change. These are the moments where most people give up, not because the work is hard, but because they underestimate the power of consistency when results aren't immediate. Here's what people forget: consistency isn't about perfection. It's about coming back. It's about staying in motion. It's about refusing to let one off day turn into an off week. When you commit to consistency, you're telling yourself, this matters enough to return to it, even when it's inconvenient. And that decision to return is the engine of long-term success. Over time, consistency builds something extraordinary: momentum. When you first begin a new habit, It takes effort to get going. It feels like pushing that snowball uphill, but eventually you hit that tipping point where the habit starts pushing you. Your workouts start giving you energy instead of costing you energy. Reading becomes something you look forward to instead of something you have to force. The healthier decisions need less willpower because they feel natural. And that's when people from the outside start saying you're so disciplined, without realizing that you don't rely on discipline anymore. You rely on momentum. The beautiful part is that consistency not only multiplies your results, but also multiplies your confidence. When you prove to yourself that you can keep a promise, even a small one, you begin trusting yourself on a deeper level. And when that trust grows, your willingness to chase bigger goals grows with it. You stop questioning whether you're capable and start asking, what else can I do? That's the moment consistency becomes more than a habit. It becomes a lifestyle that lifts everything around it. There's a moment in personal growth when something shifts not on the outside, but inside you. It's that point where progress, even the smallest amount, begins to generate its own energy. You take one step, and suddenly the next step doesn't feel quite as heavy. You push a little, and the push doesn't feel as forced as it did before. That's because growth has this incredible way of feeding itself. It's self-reinforcing. The more progress you make, the more motivated you feel to keep going. And the more motivated you feel, the easier it becomes to make even more progress. It's a cycle, a loop, a momentum engine that runs stronger with every bit of action you put into it. Most people think they need to feel confident before they take action. They wait for the feeling, the spark, the inspiration. But confidence doesn't precede growth. Growth creates confidence. You try something new, maybe you stumble a little, but then you start to see improvement. You run a little farther than last time. You speak up when you normally would have stayed quiet. You handle a situation with just a little more patience or clarity than you did before. And something inside you says, wait a second, I did that. That recognition, even if it's tiny, is powerful. It's proof. Proof that you're capable of more than you believed yesterday, and that proof becomes fuel. It lights up parts of you that were dormant. It wakes up your ambition, your drive, your courage. Suddenly, you're not trying to talk yourself into taking action. You're trying to find more time, more opportunities, more ways to keep that progress alive. You stop seeing growth as this big, intimidating mountain and start experiencing it as a climb that's actually lifting you as you go. That's the snowball effect in its purest form, growth generating more growth. The beautiful thing is that this momentum doesn't require perfection. It doesn't require massive leaps. It simply requires engagement. When you show up, when you give yourself permission to improve even a little, you're creating motion. And motion is magnetic. It pulls you toward more of what you're becoming. You start noticing improvement in areas you weren't even targeting. Maybe you're more patient at home because you've been working on your breathing. Maybe you communicate better at work because you've been reading more. Maybe you take better care of your health because you're finally recognizing your own worth. Growth bleeds into everything. It never stays in one place. And what's even more powerful is that the more growth you experience, the more resilient you become. You start to develop this deep inner belief that says, I can handle this. I've done hard things before. I can do them again. That mindset is priceless. It gives you strength during setbacks and clarity during chaos. It's not that challenges disappear, they don't. But you approach them with a different level of resourcefulness. You don't shrink from them, you expand into them. The moment you realize that every bit of progress builds the foundation for the next, you stop chasing motivation and start chasing movement. And that's when growth becomes unstoppable. One of the most remarkable things about personal growth is how one positive shift doesn't stay in its own little lane. It spreads. It reaches. It influences everything around it, often in ways you never anticipated. You start with one habit, just one, and somehow it starts pulling other healthy habits into your life with it. It's almost like once you open the door to growth, the whole house starts rearranging itself to support the new version of you that's emerging. Think about the last time you made even a small positive change. Maybe you started drinking more water, or you committed to a short walk in the mornings. At first it seems like such a small act, but then you notice that because you're walking, you have a little more energy. Because you have more energy, you're more focused at work. Because you're more focused, you feel calmer at the end of the day. And because you're calmer, you make better choices, talk to people with more patience, sleep a little better, show up a little stronger. What began as one habit quietly triggered a chain reaction. That's the beauty of momentum in growth. It doesn't stay contained. It expands into every corner of your life if you let it. When you adopt one empowering habit, you're not just improving that one area, you're upgrading your identity, and your identity affects everything. You start to see yourself differently. You trust yourself a little more, and that trust opens the door to more possibilities. The truth is, positive habits have a gravitational pull. When you build one strong habit, it becomes easier to build the next because you're operating from a different state. You've raised your standards, you've raised your awareness, you've raised your expectations for yourself, and more importantly, you're experiencing the benefits firsthand: real energy, real clarity, real pride. That becomes addictive in the best possible way. And here's what most people don't realize: habits don't just stack, they reinforce each other. When you start exercising, you naturally want to eat better because you don't want to undo your progress. When you start reading more, you naturally become more curious, more open-minded, more capable of handling challenges. When you practice gratitude, you naturally become more resilient because you retraining your mind to search for what's working instead of what's broken. One shift supports the next, and suddenly you're not just changing your behavior, you're changing your internal ecosystem. This is why the snowball effect is so powerful. Growth doesn't happen in isolation. It creates ripples. Those ripples blend, overlap, and build into waves. And before you know it, you're living from a place of greater alignment, not because you forced yourself into a dozen new habits, but because one meaningful habit invited others to join it. It's the reminder that even the smallest positive choice can become the catalyst for a completely new direction in your life. And that's how one good habit becomes the beginning of a whole new you. There's a part of the growth journey that people often misunderstand, and it's the role of setbacks. We imagine progress as this smooth, upward climb, when in reality it's anything but. It's messy, unpredictable, filled with pauses, detours, and moments where you feel like you're going backward. But here's the truth most people don't see until they've lived it. Setbacks are temporary, but the momentum you've built is lasting. Once you've started that snowball rolling, it doesn't disappear just because you hit a bump. It might slow down, it might wobble, but the force you've built from your consistent effort is still there, waiting to be re-engaged. What happens to most people is that they let setbacks redefine them. They miss a few workouts and suddenly convince themselves they're not disciplined. They break one promise to themselves and start telling a story about how they always fall off. But the reality is, a setback doesn't erase progress, it just interrupts it. And interruptions are part of the process. Think of a plane flying to a destination. It's off course most of the time, adjusting, recalibrating, course-correcting constantly, but it still lands. Growth works exactly the same way. The goal isn't to avoid setbacks, it's to know how to respond when they show up. And here's where momentum becomes your greatest ally. Because once you've taken enough steps forward, once you've built some consistency, once you've felt the effects of your own progress, you have something powerful to lean on. You're no longer starting from zero every time something goes wrong. You have skills, awareness, resilience, and experience that weren't there before. You remember what it feels like to be at your best. You remember what it feels like to follow through. You remember what it feels like to make progress, and that memory pulls you back into action, even if it takes a moment. Think about a time in your life when you were making progress in something, maybe your health, your mindset, your career, and something knocked you off track. Eventually, something inside you said, I need to get back to that. That feeling isn't guilt or pressure, it's alignment. It's the deeper part of you saying, I know who I'm becoming and I'm not done yet. That's momentum talking. Setbacks can shake you, but momentum reminds you who you were becoming before the interruption happened. And every time you get back up, you're not just restarting, you're reinforcing your identity. You're proving to yourself that you can bounce back, that you can recommit, that you can rise even when things aren't perfect. That's what builds the emotional muscle needed to grow long term. Not perfect days, but resilient comebacks. The snowball effect isn't about never stumbling, it's about becoming the kind of person who keeps rolling forward anyway. And that's how you turn temporary setbacks into lasting strength. As your personal growth gains momentum, something powerful starts to happen. Something that goes far beyond your own internal transformation. Eventually, that snowball you've been building doesn't just change you, it begins to influence the people around you. And not because you're trying to impress anyone, not because you're preaching or pushing your ideas on others, but because genuine growth is magnetic. People feel it, they respond to it, they lean into it. When you elevate your life, you elevate the environment around you without even realizing it. Think about the people in your own life who have inspired you. Most of them didn't do it with grand speeches or perfectly polished advice. They influenced you because they embodied something: discipline, passion, kindness, strength, resilience, calm, clarity. They lived in a way that made you want to rise to your own potential. That's the effect your growth can have on others. As your snowball gets bigger, as your momentum grows, you naturally become a reference point of possibility. You become the person who shows others not just what can be done, but what they can do. And the beautiful part is that it often starts quietly. Maybe someone notices how you're handling stress differently. Maybe they notice that you're more patient, more focused, more intentional. Maybe they see you taking better care of your health, or showing up with more gratitude, or treating others with a level of respect and presence you didn't always have. These small shifts speak louder than any advice ever could. People don't follow words, they follow energy, consistency, and example. The more you grow, the more you model what growth looks like in real life. Imperfect, steady, courageous, and rooted in effort rather than perfection. And when people see that, something awakens in them. They start to think, if they can do it, maybe I can too. That single thought can be the beginning of someone else's snowball. You never know which moment of your growth becomes the moment someone else decides to change their own life. And it doesn't stop with individuals. Growth spreads through families, teams, communities. When one person raises their standards, it nudges others to raise theirs. When one person breaks a generational pattern, it creates space for others to do the same. When one person brings more intention to their life, it influences the conversations, the choices, the atmosphere around them. You stop being a product of your environment and start becoming an architect of it. That's the deeper purpose of personal growth. It doesn't end with you. It was never meant to. Your growth becomes a catalyst. It becomes a spark. It becomes a silent invitation for others to rise, to heal, to improve, to believe in themselves again. And the bigger your snowball gets, the more momentum you generate, the more undeniable that influence becomes. Because the greatest gift of personal growth is realizing that by transforming yourself, you give others permission to transform too.